So this video is going to be checking injector balance, and we're going to do that with a scan tool and a fuel gauge. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to hook up the gauge. So if you can see right down in here, I've got the gauge hooked up to the Schrader valve, the service port on the fuel rail. And then the gauge comes all the way over here, and I've got it so that I can see my gauge and the scan tool at the same time. Okay, what I've done is I've gone into the scan tool. I put in the vehicle, so the Pontiac, and then I did the automatic ID, and then I went into engine, and then I went into, I'll show you, functional tests after I went into engine. So I hit functional tests, and we're going to do injector balance. So on this one here, it says ensure that the vehicle, that all fuel lines are connected, and the fuel pressure line or fuel pressure gauge is connected, and then turn the ignition switch on. The engine must be off. And so I'm going to go ahead and continue. And then it says, please note that each injector can only be pulsed once per ignition cycle. So what they're wanting to do is they don't want you to load the intake up with raw fuel. Otherwise you'll get a backfire and could damage the engine. So you have to cycle the key every so often. So what we're going to do now is we're going to check injector number 1. So we'll hit injector number 1. And it says energizing fuel system. And if you see the fuel pressure, the gauge is kind of upside down so that you can see it, but the gauge pressure is at about 45 psi. And so record gauge pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down 45 psi, then continue. See, the injector pulsed and it went down from 45 down to about 38 psi. So now I'm going to record that. So I've got 45 and 38. And then continue. And then we go to injector number 2. It pressurizes the system so you can see the gauge come up. And then I'm going to hit continue, and it's at 45 psi, so you're going to have to write that down on your worksheet. And it dropped down to 40 psi. So we had 45 and it dropped to 40. The first one was 45 to 38. Then we're going to hit continue. And injector 3. Energizing the fuel pressure. We're at about 46 psi on this one. Continue. And we dropped to 40. So 46 to 40. Continue. Injector 4. We got about 46 psi. Down to 40. So we had 40 and 46 on both of those. Hit continue. Injector number 5. Pressurize it to 46. Down to 40. And the last one, we're at 46. Down to 40. Now once you've completed the test, then what you need to do is you need to start the vehicle up and let it run that fuel out. So I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle. Okay, so the vehicle started up, that way I get all the fuel out. Now if I need to go back and redo the test, I can do that. But that's all there is to doing a fuel injector balance test. So if we look at our test results here, we've got cylinder number 1 is 45 and 38. We've got cylinder number 2 at 45 and 40, 46 and 40, and 46 and 40 the rest of the way down. So these two here, because they're different, I would probably go ahead and do those two again just to make sure that we aren't, it wasn't a problem with the gauges or our procedure or something like that. And if they turn out the same as these, then all of the injectors are working. So what this test does is it's checking for the amount of fuel that's pulsed through the injector. And each one of the injectors need to have about the same amount of fuel that's pulsed through it at each time that the computer fires the injector. And so what happens is when you turn the key on and you hit the button that says injector number 1, the PCM is going to put full fuel pressure into the fuel rail. And then when you hit the button again, what it's going to do is it's going to fire the injector several times, and it fires at exactly the same time each time, or the same number of times each time. And so once it fires all the injector, what you do is you look and see how much fuel pressure you dropped. And each injector should drop the same amount of fuel. So if you're within 1 or 2 psi, that's fine. But if you say, for instance, if you have one injector that doesn't drop any when the injector fires, then that means you've either got a plugged up fuel injector or something is wrong because it wasn't actually putting fuel into the cylinder. So if you have, say for instance, if you have a cylinder that is misfiring and you do this injector balance test on there and you find an abnormal problem with that particular cylinder, there's your problem. It's a fuel problem. It's not an air problem. It's not an ignition problem. And so this is just another diagnostic step to eliminate one of the 3 components that cause the engine not to run. If you remember, you need spark, fuel, and air to make the engine run. If you're missing one of those 3, the engine's not going to run. So